friends, Justin Michael. Welcome back to my channel, and welcome, of course, if it's your first time visiting. I appreciate you as always. We're going to take a look at this brand new deck in my collection, put out by Tarot Sheet Revival and Sullivan Hissman. It's the Tarot of Gerard Bodet, brand new. In fact, this is actually number 1 of 400. So I feel very lucky to have this deck, and I'm just really excited to look at it. So this is part of what we call the Rouen Brussels pattern. So it's linked with decks like Viville, and also, which was a Parisian deck, 17th century, middle of the 17th century, Viville. And then we have also the Adam C. de Hautot, which is like early to mid 1700s. You know, there's no definitive, because there were several Hautots and they don't know exactly which Hautot did that. It was initially assumed it was early. It was initially categorized by Dummett in his book a 17th century deck, but it's now been bumped to the 18th century. But it was an interesting deck in that it made us kind of see that the pattern, what we call the Belgium pattern, actually existed in France before Belgium. But this deck kind of throws some questions to that, because this is dated to 1693. Now, I don't know how accurate that dating is, but if it is 1693, it's printed in Liège in Belgium, and that would, you know, make this pattern existing in Belgium a lot earlier than I initially thought. You know, that was under the impression. I always thought Hautot was the earliest, and then of course Viville was. And this deck is interesting also because it's very similar, more so than the other decks, to Viville. So it's just it's an important deck historically. It makes us kind of question you know, the origins of the pattern, and it's just fun. You know, it's a fun, important deck to have. And so I'm just going to do a quick review here. I'm going to show you some of the cards. Might take from some of the other decks, but this is the beautiful envelope that it comes in, and this is actually like a work of art in itself. He does this a lot. It's actually hand painted and stenciled. Really just beautiful work. It comes wrapped in like a money band like this, but once I get this money band off, I don't put the cards back in, because that's a good way to damage the cards. And then there's also another band that goes on the outside, so it looks really pretty when it's all wrapped up, kind of like this. So so we're going to take a look at this, and we're going to take a look at the Viville and the Vandenborre and the Hautot. So I'm going to have 4 decks out. It's going to be a little bit of a challenge. Also came with some extras too here, and as you can see here, it has number 1 of 400. It came with an extra Sun card and the Queen of Coins. So I'm going to set them off to the side. We're going to take Viville, and we're going to just kind of, just to give you an idea, we're going to look at them all close together. Okay, so on the left I have a copy of the Vandenborre Tarot, which was restored by Pablo Robledo. It's one of my favorite versions of this deck. There are several, although I do only own 2. I own the Cardamundi version, and then I own this one here. I just managed to get a copy of it. I wanted it for the longest time, but it wasn't in print. Finally, Pablo, I think on a limited basis, still has some available, is now selling them, and I believe he's producing them himself. And so if you are interested, you can contact Pablo and get a copy of it. It's really a beautiful deck. It's one of my favorites. It's really, like the engraving and just the art, the line work in the card is just amazing. It's such a cool deck. It's one of my favorites of all time. The Adam C. de Hautot is the next deck here, and that's also by Tarot Sheet Revival, restored by Sullivan Hissman. It's, believe, around I'm going off by memory, and I do have a video on Hautot if you're interested in the history and also talk about the Rouen Brussels pattern. I do have a video which I'll link below, but I believe it's around 1720s, 1723. Could be as late as like 1740s. Initially, it was thought that this was actually a 17th century deck, and Dummett mentions it in the Game of Tarot and talks about it as if it was an earlier deck. And I always liked that, because I thought it has the look of an earlier deck, but for whatever reason, it's dated later. We don't know that with 100% certainty. as with everything in tarot history. We're kind of just piecing things together. This is the brand new tarot by Gerard Bodet, and it is printed in Liège in 1693. So the two earliest decks we have here this is around 1650-ish, is the Veville. We have 1693 in Liège, Belgium. This is like early 1700s, which it could be earlier than that. We don't know. In Rouen, and this one is also, in Belgium as well. So this pattern, there's really not a lot known for sure, and the Bodet actually kind of adds to that confusion a little bit, because it was my understanding that the pattern sort of originated, or at least the early forms originated in Paris and Rouen, and I always thought of Hautot as the earliest kind of in the lineage of like the Vandenborre, full Rouen Brussels pattern. I always thought of that as like the earliest version, but if the dates are right, this is actually earlier, and on top of it, it's in Belgium. So I don't really know how to piece that together yet, so I don't want to give you too much information about that. You can make up your own mind and do your own research, but I have a feeling it was a French pattern. I think that what happened was, because Gerard Bodet sounds like a French name, probably during the middle of the 17th century, the tax the tax policies chased a lot of card makers away, and I feel like Bodet was probably in that category, and he moved to Belgium and was producing decks there. That's what I think, because but it's hard to know for sure, but that's what I think. Out of all these decks, the Bodet is closest to the Veville out of all of them, and you'll see that more in the pips than in the majors, although you do see it in the majors as well. So we're going to take a quick look. I'm not going to obsess over this and do too much in detail, but I do want to show you the backs. These are the backs. It's the same kind of cardstock you typically get from Sullivan Hissman's, which is like a double-sided graphic cardboard. It's not it's something that feels like real paper, it's not like a playing card stock, but I really like his. It's a collector's kind of card stock. You know what I mean? So Sullivan says on his website that this is an original work of art that closely, basically, and I'm paraphrasing. I'm going to link his website below, and you can read it by yourself. But this should stand alone as an original work of art based heavily on the original works, and I really like that with a restoration. I like that language in that you're not claiming to be exact. You're not claiming, this is the most authentic representation of this deck or whatever. To me, that's just silliness. And I happen to think that Sullivan's work is like really historically accurate. But what he does is he redraws the historic lines, and he does it very, very well. It's a restoration in that respect. Then he scans those copies to black and white copy, and then he stencils it, and that's how you get the original looking kind of stencil look. And that's what Tarot Sheet Revival is all about. It's kind of reviving the historic look of the old cards, and he's about the best at it. He's one of the best, Sullivan Hissman. So I'm very pleased with this. I really am, and it's really growing on me. My favorite has always been Hautot, and it probably still is because the characters and stuff are so lovable in it. But I'm really growing. This deck is growing on me, and I'm learning a lot. So let's take a look here. So we have Veville, Bodet, Hautot, and Vandenborre, and so you can see the similarities, all throughout. Probably the most unique is the Hautot. He has like sort of a Quaker look, almost like a very. It seems like even the dress, the style of the outfit is like 1600s. That's what it suggests to me. It looks like a Quaker or something, like William Penn or something. Very, very cool style. I also love the colors too. And there's a limited amount of colors in that deck. He's very much a minimalist. when it comes to you know, that coloring. Now, like with all the other Belgium style decks, the Rouen Belgium decks, you have the Spanish captain replaces the Papes. That's true in the Vandenborre, the Hautot, and the Bodet, but you know, we have still the Papes and Viviel, you know, and it's very kind of Terre de Marseille style. It's almost like Viviel is a cross between Terre de Marseille and the Rouen Brussels pattern. And so what Sullivan also argues is that he believes that these two are so similar with, you know, in certain respects, that he believes that they either share a common ancestor or you know, this deck was copied from that in a more Baroque style, is his exact words. But anyway, I explained what the Spanish captain is. There was a pattern of examples that, you know, card makers got rid of the Papes and the Pope because they were considered blasphemous, and they replaced them in some cases with Juno and Jupiter, which are the best in Somme types. And then we have the Belgium style, which has the Spanish captain instead, which is a character from the Commedia dell'arte. There's a good article by Cheryl Smith. I'll link that below. But you could also see my previous video on Hautot, and I explain all that. I'm not going to really focus on that here. I just want to look at the similarities, and there are a ton of them. Okay, now you can see, you know, the similarity with Viviel, but what you'll notice with Hautot is that it's number 4 instead of number 3, and the Adam C. de Hautot is one of the only decks that I've ever seen this. I don't know if I've ever seen it where the Empress outranks the Emperor in the game. So I had to switch them around. Typically it would be the Emperor then the Empress. And that may just be, you know, something they did, you know, locally. So very, very beautiful. And you can really see the similarities here, you know. So with Viviel and Bodet, you have the number in the same exact spot. Different faces and so forth, but very close, you know, very, very close in terms of the drawing. You know, even the shape of the arm and everything, and the scepter and the number up top, and, you know, you can really tell that they're very, very close, much closer than the others are. So let's do this a bit quicker here. Now we have the Bacchus, which is, you know, replacing the Pope. In Viviel, you still have the Pope. Bacchus is a character, Roman god of wine and ecstasy and so forth. He's kind of a party animal. He's the antithesis of the Pope. You know, in my opinion, he's a rebellious kind of Pope, is the way I see him. But he's also Dionysus in Greek, you know. And he was a character popular, even all over the Palace of Versailles. You see, you know, carvings of statues of the Bacchus. You know, and I've actually, I'm wearing a Bacchus T-shirt right now. I've come to really love the Bacchus, and so very one of my favorites. You know, my favorite is probably Hautot, although I love the Vandenborre too. This one's cool. You know, it just doesn't have like the kind of leafy green hat that the others do. Maybe it's just the colors that were chosen by Sullivan, but I tend to like this more, you know, this look. He looks like he has a head of golden hair, you know, instead of the leafy crown that he's wearing in the others. But and the engraving in the Vandenborre is just superb. I mean, and obviously this was part of it is because of Pablo Robledo, but I mean, just the details in the Vandenborre, it's one of my favorite decks in terms of the art, the line work. The Angel and the Lovers, you know, very similar across, probably the most similar in these two. You have something very different in Hautot, based in the same thing, and then you have like a canopy instead of a bow and arrow in Vandenborre, but that's really cool, you know. The Chariot is the same across except in the Viviel. You know, the Viviel, you have more of a Terre de Marseille style chariot, type 1 even, with the curly canopy. You know, you have that unique breastplate, but very Terre de Marseille otherwise, you know. And then he has the faces also. Like the horses have human faces, so, in Vivial. It's a really cool chariot. And these are all kind of similar. So now we have Justice here, which in this case, the wings look like chairbacks. You know, not sure exactly if it was supposed to be one or the other, but you often see them kind of switch back and forth. You know, sometimes it's a chairback, sometimes it's a wings. Probably meant to be wings initially, but there's no way of knowing, you know. So I really love the Bodet Hermit. It's really colorful, beautiful colors, unique, different. All of them are kind of unique in their own way. You have the Vandenborre, he's holding the book in his right hand. You have a totally different pose in the Hautot. In Bodet, he's kind of in the same position as Vandenborre and Vivial, but he's not holding a book, you know, in either Vivial or Bodet. In Vandenborre, he's holding a book, but similar kind of pose with his hands, you know, and again, very similar to Vivial. You know, you see that he's holding a cane in both, and whatever that is in his left hand, I don't know if that's maybe just part of his cloak or whatever that is, but he's holding it up, so you can see, you know, very, very similar. And of course, I mean, the obvious is that it has the same border as the Hautot, and you know, that's something I explained in another video, but typically what would happen is in the Italian decks, the backs and the borders would be the same, and they were folded over, and that's how they got that border. You know, they would use the back to fold over to the front of the card to kind of create a border, and that actually style was, you know, the cards were created that way in Italy for the longest time, but you know, these had different backs, so it was just kind of maybe in that style but not folded over. Maybe initially it was, and that's what makes me wonder if it was originally an Italian pattern, or at least from Italy, because of those folded over borders. So that's another piece of evidence that I think of sometimes, in that, you know, it's very possible that it came originally from Italy. In fact, it's probably more than likely. Anyway, okay, and strength, very similar to Vivial, you know. You have La Force written in Hautot. But even like in Vivial, you see, I mean, you have the similar kind of little quirks, and then you also have that in Vandenborre as well. So, you know, it's very cool to look at. The Hangman is probably my favorite, or at least one of my favorite, aside from the Bacchus in the Rouen Brussels type decks. You know, he's intentionally inverted, at least it appears so. Maybe not in the Vivial, but because there's no label, you can't really tell, although there's a number there etched in. Looks like almost like an afterthought that was etched in, you know, the number. I don't know if it was originally there, and I think Dummett talks about that in his book. But the rest of these, I mean, it's very obvious. You know, they all have labels, so it's intentionally inverted. Here you have like kind of a rope even added up top, so he's not actually inverted here. He's hanging from his head, is what it looks like, you know, but his leg is still crossed, like as if he were inverted. But very cool, you know, beautiful. One of my favorites of all is in this pattern. Death card, also beautiful, very similar to Vivial. You know, these two, same exact height, you know. The difference, it doesn't have La Mort there, but still just so much in common with Vivial. You can really see it. Cool. Okay, Temperance is interesting because, well, for one, I mean, the different spellings you have. So you have La Temperance, you have a Trempence and a Trempence in these two. So in both, this is the Hautot, this is the Bodet, and it's spelled wrong, a Trempence, right? You have nothing here written in the Vivial, but what you have is Famous Soul, which is backwards actually, so you could tell it was copied probably by the engraver. You know, it's almost like a mirror effect. Famous Soul, I believe, means soul only. No, fame only. Fame only. Maybe it's something to do with infamy, because I was asking the question of why, you know, temperance outranked death, and the other virtues did not. You know, for instance, strength and justice didn't outrank death, but temperance did. And I just wonder if it was like means like something similar to infamy, like if somebody lives in infamy, they're kind of, you know, they transcend death in a way. So not sure if that's what that means or not, but fame soul, fame only. Very interesting. Okay, and another one of my favorites, the Devil. Hautot wins here if I had to choose. I love the Hautot Devil. It's my favorite devil. I mean, he's just such a lovable character. But these two are very similar in that, you know, same size, similar horns. The tail is kind of very similar. You know, a lot of the same kind of quirks. And even here too, to some extent. But he's just kind of scarier. This devil's kind of, I don't know, he's a bit chaotic. It's hard to kind of see what's going on there. There's a lot going on, but the Hautot is, I guess these two are very scary. He's kind of like a lovable devil, you know, in the Hautot. Okay, and Le Foudre, which is lightning, and I've explained this many times. The Tower card originally, presumably, is about lightning, you know, because it precedes the star, and then the moon and the sun, and that's what we call the hierarchy of lights. You know, it's kind of a flash, and then you have the kind of constant specks of the stars, then the luminous moon, and then the bright sun. And if you look at the early decks, a lot of them have lightning striking people, striking trees in this case, and striking a tower. And it just so happens that the tower became Les Maisons Dieu, and, you know, it became adopted by the modern tarot. But initially, you know, this card, I believe, was about lightning and not so much the structure of the tower. It wasn't as important. So I like to think of this as, well, the Vivial especially, I like to think of that as a Rowan tree. Because Rowan, it's probably not, you know, it kind of looks different in all of these. But I think of the Vivial one as Rowan because they look like almost like Rowan berries there. Because Rowan is connected to lightning in several different stories and mythology. And I just kind of like that. I've used it myself. But very similar here, these two. Very, very similar. You know, I love the Vandenborre. It's such a cool looking deck. There's so many cool little things like that. I mean, that looks so cool. Okay, and the star, again, these two very similar. It's a bit different here. And all similar in their own way. You know, this is one of my favorites of Vandenborre. This card here. You know, the moon. It's just such a beautiful job. You know, the engraving. I mean, it's so, like, well done. And Pablo has done such a nice job restoring it. So, and here we have the sun, which is, you know, a naked child riding a horse. You really won't see that again in another tarot deck until the Rider Pack. And it does have a long history, going back very far, early in tarot history of a child kind of riding a horse. Well, it's not a child here. I mean, it's like a soldier with a flag. These two kind of look like a young person riding a horse. These two very similar, very angry sun and Vivial. I always thought that the sun was jealous of the rider, you know, because the sun's stuck up in the sky and the rider's, you know, riding naked and free. Kind of represents freedom in a way, you know, if you're using it for cartomancy. Judgment. The Hautot is, again, very unique, you know. I mean, just look at the similarities here, you know, with the people and the, you know, if you take the color out of it especially. And the World. Okay, so this is an interesting card because, you know, the Veal is, of course, the odd man out. has a more traditional Tower de Marseille style world, we see in Type 1 and Type 2 TDM. This is more in line with like the Tower of Paris. You see the Tower of Paris has these kind of little animal characters on all of their cards. You can tell that this card came from that tradition, possibly, and just brought the border with it, Okay, and so these two have the full numbered 22, whereas Viville and Bodet do not have the full number 22, which is interesting, because the full is a pass card. Now I wonder, in the game, if it's number 22, does that mean that the full is just the most powerful card? Does that change the game at all, or does it make it just like, is there a difference between the full being the most powerful trump and being a trump that is wild? I guess not. Maybe not in terms of the game, because if it's the most powerful trump, then it can trump any other trump, and so I guess it's the same as 0. I don't know, but very interesting nonetheless. And normally I don't focus too much on the pips. We're going to look at the pips in these decks because I believe they're very important. We have the aces here, and you can see, other than the Vandenborre, the droplets are gone. These two, again, very similar. The shapes of the baton, the shape of the hand, even the droplets, the directions of the droplets, I mean, they're very similar. The batons in this are more of like a Swiss style, like something you see in like Gasman or some of the other Swiss decks, Claude Burdel, something like that, and even in some of the Italian decks, whereas these are more TDM, Tower de Marseille type, and of course we see them as early as even the carry sheet has these kind of batons. Similar things going on in each card. Okay, so we're not going to look at every single one. I'm going to kind of go through them fast, but fives, I mean, everything is very, very similar. That's actually, yeah. Okay. Very cool. Okay, and so we're going to come up to the core cards, which I'm excited to look at. See them all. So we have the pages, page of batons. And you can really see the similarities here. Very, very similar. Some details change, but even the shape of the wand, the little I guess those little well, they're on here too, but even the ground, Okay, and then we have the knight. Very cool. Queen of batons. And so she has the name written here, whereas the rest of them have the bottom, except Viville has no labels all throughout. So, yeah, and that's very Viville-ish too. The king. I always like this king, the king of wands, the king of batons. And Hautot, he's really different, different face, but still similar in its own way, Okay, cups are really important because you can see here now, Sullivan has added 2 cups in his deck here. I guess this is probably, I'm guessing, is what it looks like in the facsimile or whatever, and he's restored it here, because as you can see, I mean, everything else is very similar to this. So even up here, so presumably it would have been a Gothic style chalice, and so he's probably repaired that, and so he's added both for for the sake of nerding out. But Gothic style, whereas this is more like the Swiss, closed ciborium, I think they're called. Yeah, so very, very cool. And now in the cups, in the twos, this little inscription here, and I believe in all the decks, in cups and coins in the females or the round suits, the lower number cards outrank the higher number cards in the game. And so that's what you have written on the card, something kind of saying that. And you can see the similarities in Viville with the cups. And Sullivan was even saying even the position of the cups, I mean, you can tell it's almost like it was copied directly, or at least they share a common ancestor, you know. They're so similar, you know. I mean, you can see, I mean, even the position of the cups, I mean, look how close they are, whereas these are kind of different styles, you know. It's really got a lot in common with Viville in a lot of ways. Maybe it's like the smaller cups kind of match up. A lot of subtle little similarities. Yeah. I mean, they're very, very close. So, of course, we are not going to know. Is Viville a unique kind of standalone creation of its time where all of these decks borrowed directly from Viville, or was it a tradition that existed? Probably more likely a tradition that existed, because I think the chances of getting it, you know, first off, so few of these decks survived, and the fact that, you know, the chances of the deck, one of the decks that survived from that period just happened to be like the original deck of that style is like, just seems almost impossible in my mind. But again, you know, who knows? I could just be talking out of my ass. I'm not a tarot historian, but you know, there's just common sense kind of reasoning in my mind. Yeah, I mean, you see here the similarities, but just really, really cool. Very happy to have this deck in my collection. It certainly poses more questions for me, but and I was just talking to Sullivan earlier tonight, and he was mentioning that, you know, somebody needs to go through the archives in Belgium to really kind of work out the lineage of these card makers and so forth. I hope somebody does that, you know. But again, the similarities in the cups in these two are just very, very close. Yeah, you know. So very, very cool. I love doing these kind of comparisons. I'm always afraid it might get a bit redundant for people, but I really enjoy doing them because I learn a lot, and sometimes you just see things that you don't notice otherwise, you know. And I would love to hear from you guys too, if you see anything or notice anything that I didn't point out. The King of Cups. Very, very cool. Wow. Yeah, you know, I love this Ace of Swords in the Vandenborre. Awesome. Okay, let's look at the swords here. Okay, so Viville, of course, is the outlier here. This is very similar. Now, Marco Benedetti had a fragment of a deck that looked I don't know where it was from, but the swords were it presumably an Italian deck, a really old Italian deck, a fragment like around the time of like Ercole d'Este and all those early Italian decks, and the swords were almost identical to what we see in the Belgium deck with like birds and stuff. So who knows, you know. But fun to think about and try to piece together the history. This one you have the number 3 there, which is pretty cool. So the swords are probably the most different with the Vivial, you know. But and Sullivan also talked about doing like an animated kind of comparison or something to Vivial and Bodet, which I would look forward to if he would do that. It would be cool. Because with the naked eye, you know, just me looking at it, you can see the similarities, but the Valet of Swords. This gets messy when you're doing a walkthrough of 4. You know, you're doing a comparison with 4 decks. It gets really messy, but it's a lot of fun. So we are coming up into the important suit of coins, though, which you know, for our purposes here, are going to be very important. So what's interesting about the Vandenborres is cartes de Suisse. You know, so it's almost a nod to the Swiss tarot. That might explain why the batons are like Swiss style. Not really sure. And then this says cartes tarot is trace finis, you know, fine tarot of and this has Gerard Bodet's name on it. And then so the Ace of Coins here has actually the majors. Because it's not labeled, the deck isn't labeled, it has the Trump's names on here. That's right, I forgot about that. There's 2 Aces of Coin in Bodet. I'm going to have to really look at them. They look subtly different in terms of color, but I don't really notice much as of right now. Could just be an extra card too. Wait, what? Yeah. I thought there was 3 for a second. Okay, and then we have the 2 of coin. Sorry. More traditional, like TDM style. Still very unique in its own way, though. Okay. Love the Swiss. Well, they are kind of Swiss in a way, but the because they have the red cross. But the Belgium style coins are really cool. 5. This was a lot of fun. I hope you enjoyed this. And so yeah, I mean, it's really good quality. Everything you would expect from Sullivan Hissman. The work is phenomenal. It's very important in terms of tarot history, and you know, his restorations are always significant, in my opinion. You know, Sullivan has a great track record of producing these decks that are just, they're game changers in a lot of ways. And that's all she wrote. So thanks for tuning in, guys. I appreciate you. And until next time, everyone, love and peace. Bye-bye.